On this 2006 Hyundai Azera, the problem I believe is going on is a leaking front valve cover gasket. There's oil leaking onto the alternator and eventually onto the exhaust manifold, causing a burning smell, and then it's leaving a couple spots on the garage floor. So I believe it's the front valve cover here. We've got just about everything taken off to start removing the bolts that hold the valve cover to the cylinder head. It's really not all that bad, and even getting to the back one isn't too bad either. It's just more complex with the intake that has to come off. But with the right tools and a little knowledge, you can get it off. It's not too bad. But what I want to see is if this little bit of RTV down here in the corner is gone. And if so, that's our problem. So as soon as I get these other bolts off here, we'll pull it off and I'll be able to see if that's indeed where it was leaking from. There's the valve cover. And the gasket looks pretty intact still, but it could still be leaking down there. We'll take a closer look. This is a front here where I suspect it's leaking. As you can see, there is a small little line there, almost like a crack, where the timing cover meets up with the cylinder head, and there's no sealant there, no RTV at all. And while it is very possible that this engine could be leaking at the timing cover as well, there is also a good chance that it was just this portion of the RTV around the valve cover gasket leaking. That's what I'm hoping, and at least that's what I'm going to start with, because it's definitely the faster and cheaper part to begin with. So I'm going to scrape this off with a razor blade, clean the rest of it off there, and I have a new valve cover gasket that I'll put on. And then I'll clean the engine up with engine degreaser, and we'll see if that takes care of the leak. New valve cover gaskets in place, and of course the tricky part about that is making sure that it stays on the valve cover when you put it back on the engine. And one way to make that simpler is to put some RTV along the valve cover gasket in the valve cover groove, so that way it sticks in there and doesn't fall out when you put it back on the engine. So that's what I did. And as you can see, the little sealing areas there, the RTV is squeezed out, so those should be sealing fine now. Now all I have left to do is torque all the valve cover bolts back down. Man, there were a bunch of them on this thing. I want to say there was like over 15, maybe close to 20 of them. So now all we got to do is put everything back together, starting with all the valve cover bolts. Alright, the valve cover is back on with the new gasket. Everything is put back in place, plugged in, resecured. It's a pretty straightforward job, not too bad at all. So all I got to do now is clean off the oil from the timing cover and the valve cover here. And then I'll start it up and let it run for a little while, check and see if we still have some leaks. And hopefully it's all taken care of. I have the engine idling for about 5 minutes. As you can see, there's a little smoke from the catalytic converter burning off the runoff there after I cleaned it off with brake clean. But if you look down where we made the repairs, everything looks good. There are no visible oil leaks. Yeah, there we go. no leaks, which is a good thing. Everything's looking good. So we'll let the, I'll run it for a little bit, let the catalytic converter burn off whatever's on it. I'm also going to take a look at the oil pan and raise it up on the lift here right quick. Here's underneath the vehicle. And as you can see, it's pretty wet. There's a lot of oil leaking here, not just from above there, but I also believe from, fortunately, the lower oil pan gasket. And I say gasket, there really isn't even a gasket there, it's just RTV sealant. So the upper oil pan seal, as you can see, it's not nearly as bad as this one. So I think what I'll do, if he wants me to go ahead and fix this, I'll make a video of this, and that'll be the next video if I reseal this oil pan. So there you go. So far pretty easy to fix the oil leak on these. Not bad. Here I'm resealing an oil pan, the lower oil pan on a 2006 Hyundai Azera with a 3.8 V6. It was pretty easy. There were only 4 screws that had to come off for a splash shield, and then all the oil pan bolts for the lower oil pan were easily accessible. And the tricky part though was getting the pan off, because it's just RTV sealant holding it on. So when I use my pry bars, you can see I kind of marred up the pan, the lower aluminum or the upper aluminum pan there. So I'll just flatten that out and smooth that down. In fact, they even tell you that if you use RTV, it seals better if you put little grooves in it. So it might not hurt after all, but I'm still going to flatten it down because there's some pretty sharp edges on there. The other thing that happened too, when I removed this, I didn't take a video of removing it, there really isn't much to see. But when I removed it, I was prying on this area here, and so I pried it back a little bit and bent it. But the easy fix to that is just lay your pan flat on the ground and then take a hammer and go and hammer along the edges, and that flattens the edge of the pan out so it looks like that. All I've got to do now is scrape the remaining gasket material off with a razor blade and clean the pan up a little bit here. Now put some fresh RTV around the lower oil pan there, put it back in, fill it up with oil, change the filter while I'm at it, and this thing will be good to go. So my little tube of RTV split open on me while I was applying it, so I just spread it on there the rest of the way. It's not perfect, but it'll still work. I'll wipe the excess off as soon as I put it up there. All I got to do is mount it, put the bolts in, tighten it up, and make sure that it seals. I've had the engine running for about 15 minutes, and so far everything is looking good. I'm not seeing any leaks anywhere. No more drips are forming. It's still a little wet from the previous leaks, but don't see any new drips. We'll go out and drive it a bit and call it good.